Good morning and welcome to our expert session on ethics. I'm so happy all of you are here. I see we've got about 24 people on right now. I'm sure we'll have some other people joining us in the next few minutes. Thank you. Yes, I just want to do a very quick sound check. If you can hear me talking through the speakers on your computer, please type a yes into the chat box. All of you as participants on with us today, you are muted, but you will be able to type in the chat box for a discussion. So I see a lot of yeses coming through. I'm going to assume the technology is working for us on our end. If you ever at any point have any trouble hearing, you can try to plug in some headphones into your headphone jack or some external speakers. Sometimes that helps a little bit, and I'll type that into the chat box in a minute if anybody has any trouble and cannot hear me right now. Wonderful, thanks. I know we've got representation from around the nation here with us today, and I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us for this expert session with Julie Stevens. In just a few minutes, Julie is going to start. I'd like to introduce her. Julie is an advanced certified prevention specialist in the state of Texas, and she's trained thousands of professionals in the state of Texas on this topic of ethics. And so we are in for a very energetic and enthusiastic 1-hour expert session this morning on this topic. Julie is an advocate of science-validated substance abuse prevention strategies, programs, and practices. While Julie's professional background has to do with substance abuse prevention, the work that she does in ethics absolutely applies to our work as child development professionals. And so I'm very excited for Julie to share with us her strategies and decision-making program on how we work through ethical dilemmas in our everyday work. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Julie, and we will.
Thank you, Natalie. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Yes, part of what I do in my training and workforce development among substance abuse prevention professionals is ethics. There is a requirement, 6 hours of ethics, prevention ethics specifically is required to become a certified prevention specialist. So it's a little different, ethics from counselor ethics. It's different from business ethics. It specifically addresses the work that prevention professionals do in the field, in the community, with families, individuals, and their colleagues. And so let me see my little, there we go. So what we're going to do today is understand the ethical responsibilities within the profession of early childhood education, hopefully. And we will look also at standards of conduct for prevention professionals. And then I have a specific decision-making model that I'm going to share with you that you can utilize to make decisions in your ethical situations. So without further ado, let me just talk about the code of ethics. Oops, I need to remember to change the field. The code of ethics for the National Association of Education of Young Children states that it's a core, defines the core values of the field and provides guidance for what professionals should do as you encounter different obligations or responsibilities in your work. You need to think of a code of ethics as a model for exemplary professional behavior. The principles in the code of ethics really express your recognition for the responsibilities that you have to the public and to other service providers and colleagues and to your service recipients, the children and the families that you work with. The code will guide you in the performance of your professional responsibilities and help express the basic tenets of your ethical conduct. They actually call for honorable behavior even at the sacrifice possibly of personal advantage. I don't know about you, but I have had groups and people that were appreciative of what we did and offer gift certificates or money. And, you know, that would be a personal advantage for me. However, it's not particularly ethical to accept those kinds of remunerations. So, but when you look at your code of ethics, think of it as goals toward which you will be working and striving, and not necessarily limitations or restrictions from what you do. So, I'm sure that this code of ethical conduct that has been written by the National Association of Education of Young Children has been guided over the years by the core value and competencies that have emerged from the field that you are in. So let me see, move on. But I want to sort of familiarize you. Ethics is there are many different philosophies about ethics that don't necessarily agree with each other, and so when we talk about ethical conduct, it depends on our definition and our values. Natural law theory with Thomas Aquinas was about that we should focus on God's role actually as a giver of natural law. And so whatever natural law is, then that was ethical. Also that as humans recipients in natural law, it's also about practical rationality. So whatever is rational and practical is basically ethics, according to Thomas Aquinas and what he believed and what he said. There's also one theory called utilitarianism, and that's basically what's the cost benefit of ethical decision and social worth. The morality of action is determined by its consequences. So we have a desire for happiness, and that's a pretty universal desire. And so in the utilitarianism philosophy, happiness is synonymous with pleasure and unhappiness with pain. So actions that we do are right to the extent that they promote happiness. And deontology is about duty. What should we do? We should do what's right for the sake of what's right. And morality. This was Immanuel Kant that believes this. So we do what we do purely out of goodwill, and not because of particular rewards that we might receive or punishments that we might receive because of the consequences of our actions. And then rights ethic is about moral rights, and this is about human nature. And the belief is that rights are self-evident and they're God-given. So the question here with rights ethics today is particularly, I think, we struggle with, who has the right to live and who has the right to die and who has the right to procreate. There was a lawsuit, back in the 20s, I think, and it was Carrie Buck versus the state of North Carolina. Carrie was deemed, I guess you quote unquote, feeble-minded because her mother was in an asylum. And so the assumption was that Carrie was, feeble-minded because her mother was. And so Carrie was actually raped and got pregnant. And so the assumption was that Carrie's baby would be feeble-minded, that she should not have the right to procreate. And so the state of North Carolina, after her baby was born, forced her to be sterilized. So that went to the Supreme Court. And actually the Supreme Court upheld the North Carolina's right to sterilize her. And this was a practice that, Oklahoma, if there was a criminal who had more, 3 offenses, they could be sterilized, homosexuals. And so it was called eugenics, and there was a question about that early on in our society. So that's another one about rights ethics. Who has the right? And we struggle with that today with suicide. Who has a right to, because if they're ill, perform doctor-assisted suicide. So that's another question. The other one is virtue ethics. And that the virtues themselves, the motives, moral character, moral education, moral wisdom, should have a role in what sort of person we should be and how we should live. So I just wanted to let you know that there are different conflicting ethical theories that we need to look at. According to the ethical conduct code of ethical conduct from the National Association of Education of Young Children, there is a framework for professional responsibilities, and it falls into 4 sections with children, families, colleagues, and community and society. So often the right answer is not necessarily evident. And the interesting thing to me about these 4 sections that the code addresses is that they basically fall into 4 categories of research done by David Hawkins and Joseph Catalano about risk and protective factors. They identified, gosh, years ago in the 1990s, I believe, they're from the University of Washington, risk and protective factors that predisposed children to abuse substances or to have violent tendencies or to drop out of school. And they also felt the risk and protective factors research fell into 4 domains, and they include individual domains and characteristics that a child may have, including bad temperament or antisocial behavior. And then their peers, so what kind of influence peers had on them if peers were abusing drugs. And then there was a family domain, and the question there was, do children live in families of alcoholics, that have parents that are alcoholics, or that approve of drug abuse? And then the community domain, do they actually live in a community that has certain social norms that approve of drug use? Is law enforcement, is law enforced in certain communities or not? So the community, does it approve of drug use? The community was also a very influential sector that had influence on whether a child abused drugs or got into trouble or dropped out of school. So it's interesting to me that in this code of ethics, they also fall into the domains that Hawkins and Catalano identify. I need to tell you that they also identify protective factors within all of those domains. So there's certain things that help children rise above the situations that they were in with their families or their peers or their communities and society. So that's important to recognize as well. When we're looking at the ethical responsibilities to children, we know that childhood is a unique time, especially the ages of 1 to 3, when the brain is developing and the brain is growing. So this includes, it's imperative we provide care and support in settings that are safe and healthy and nurturing for children and families, and that we're committed to support their development by understanding the differences and celebrating those differences and helping children engage in community, and that we're committed to developing and promoting child self-awareness, competence, resilience, and overall well-being. So as individual children, we need to celebrate their uniqueness. Also, what we know about children is that if we provide them opportunities, skills, and recognition for certain talents they may have or abilities that they may have, they need to have music lessons, sports lessons, computer lessons, anything like that would provide them opportunities, skills, and recognition. And in that case, they bond and attach to the group that does that. So if it's a family, if it's a school, then they will bond and attach to that group, and then they will adopt the healthy behaviors and standards of that group. So this is a critical time for child development when they're making attachments. And I hope you also, and you can let me know in your chat if you're familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACEs study. Oh, good. Okay. I see several of you are familiar with ACEs. If you're not, you should Google it. ACEs is Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it's some research that shows that children are so totally influenced by what happens to them early on, and the tension and the trauma that they experience in childhood. And that tension and trauma translates in adulthood to various problems, like actually early death, mental health problems, substance abuse problems, physical problems like obesity and diabetes. Even the study showed that children who experience adverse childhood experiences, even is even related to diabetes. The what happens when a child is experiencing those things is that their brain chemistry is changed, and instead of experiencing normal neurotransmitters in the brain, when they're exposed to abuse or they witness abuse in a family, then the cortisol and the adrenaline floods their brain. It changes their brain chemistry and brain structure. So I really, oh good, thank you, Natalie, for putting that link up. You should look at that link if you're working with children, because it's so critical and important in their lives. All right. Now, we also have unethical responsibilities for families, and that's kind of what I've touched on already. They have the greatest influence on child development in early years, and so we have a responsibility to foster communication, cooperation, and collaboration between professionals and families as well. We recognize that we have a shared common interest with families in the well-being of children. Families are primary importance in the child's development. So because the family and the early childhood practitioner, which you guys are, you have a common interest in the child's well-being itself. And so basically, it's important to strengthen families and strengthen those communications in families, and encourage family celebrations and family communications. And there's lots of parenting classes, and there's strengthening families curriculum, a lot of curriculum that work with children and parents to strengthen that bond that families have. This is just the most critical thing in a child's life, is to have that family. And sometimes what happens is, the family is not a healthy family, and so a child may find alternatives in grandparents or coaches or teachers, other things that provide them that nurturing that they need. It's not unfortunately, it's not always the family that can provide that. Okay, so also we have responsibility to our colleagues, and when you have a caring workplace and where human dignity is respected and professional satisfaction is promoted, then there are positive relationships that can be developed and sustained in the workplace. So we have a responsibility to our colleagues to maintain those settings as well, in relationship that support productive work and meet professional needs. And so the same ideals apply to your relationship. You want to honor human dignity, promote personal satisfaction. You also have a responsibility, ethical responsibility, to support health in a colleague. There may be a colleague that has some sort of a problem, and you can be supportive of that. There also may be a colleague that you know of that has performed some type of unethical behavior, and you might want to, you probably need to look at whether you have a responsibility, if you have firsthand knowledge of it, not if you have secondhand, but firsthand knowledge of it, to report that behavior. So you'll want to look at your policy manual and see, what happens if you're aware of those, of some kind of problematic behavior in a colleague as well. The other thing is we have a responsibility to our community and our society. Our services are within the context of local communities, which are made up of families and other institutions. So we have a responsibility to provide diverse programming, and this means programming that will meet the needs of children that may not be of the majority population. So we need to help families gain access to resources in the community and help develop those programs. And we must acknowledge our expertise in the field as advocate for the best interests of children and serve as a voice for children. But the other thing about the society piece is you may want to look at your support of certain policies and legislations that are supportive of what you do with children. So when there's legislation, I know in Texas recently about foster children and the services that they need, then you may not be able to advocate or lobby because of your job, but you certainly can educate legislators about what would be best in our society for the families and the children that we work with. So that is, to me, that's a pretty important component of being responsible to community and society, and that is to advocate for those policies and regulations that can take place that help kids as well. So the core values are about the standards of ethical behavior in early childhood care and education. They're based on commitment to these core values that are here on the screen, that are rooted in the history of the field of early childhood education. So basically what the core values that we are looking at is appreciation of childhood as a unique and valuable stage of life. And understand that with children that their brains aren't developed fully and they have certain behaviors, but they're certainly a unique set of people. So we need to understand how they develop and learn and support the bond between the child and the family. Recognize that children are best understood and supported within the context of the community, including family, their culture, community, and society. Respect the dignity, worth, and uniqueness of each individual with which we interact. Respect the diversity in children and families and colleagues. And recognize that children and adults achieve their best potential in the context of the relationships that they are in. So those must be respected as well. So this is part of the core values of the Code of Ethical Conduct for the National Association of Education of Young Children. It's not part of the actual principles, but certainly the core values are important as well. And the relationships within the ethical conduct are important as well. So what we do in our workplace and settings, we must be guided by self-awareness, trust, respect, flexibility, and collaboration. And respect each child. You nurture the relationships. Maintain professional competence. This is an interesting point because we have a commitment and an ethical obligation to maintain our competence, meaning we need to receive and seek out the education that we need to keep up with the field, things that are going on with the field, the research in the field, and provide evidence-based strategies that are going to produce the outcomes that we're looking for in the field. So, I started in this field 30 years ago, and the things I learned then are way out of date. There's so much more research about, what's important to know and do. And then work on systems that collaborate and provide high quality services, because there are several components to a system of childcare, including law enforcement and faith-based groups and education groups and local government. And so all of these are components of a system that should be collaborating to provide comprehensive services for children, and then advocate for resources in the field to elevate the field to best practice. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, I know we can't lobby, but we certainly can certainly advocate and especially educate your legislators and your policymakers and your oh gosh, county commissioners and city council people about best practices for children, and positive outcomes for the practices that we do. So that's important. We're going to get now to our ethical decision making model. And if you're like me, you just sort of have a knee-jerk reaction to making a decision. I just jump to the decision instead of thinking about the various other players that might be impacted by the decision that I make. And so this is a really good way to stop and take a deep breath and look at how you can best make the decision for any issue or ethical dilemma that you may have. And the components of the decision-making process includes clarifying the issues, getting the facts, developing options, assessing the options, and then you make the decision and test it. And then develop a plan for implementing it, implement it, and actually evaluate it. So the evaluation part is important as well. So let's look at what each of these steps means. So when you're looking at clarifying the issues, you want to ask who has a stake in the decision. And let me ask you guys, and you can chat a little bit. Who would have a stake in the decision that you need to make around the children that you're working with? Families do, parents do, staff do, biological parents and adoptive funders do. Thank you, Sherry. Sometimes we don't think about that. Funders do, because sometimes in our statement of work that we have for a grant or whatever, there's a particular target population that you must work with, organization that you work for. So yes, all of these are groups that have a stake in the decision. We're talking children, parents, communities, guardians, law enforcement, adoptive parents, foster parents, biological parents. It's very true. I happen, as a personal story, I have a niece, two nieces who foster cared and adopted children, and they happen to be brothers. So there's, it's interesting to me firsthand to see this process and the situation and everything that they must do in order to go through the adoption process. And so we're looking at possible biological parents that, fathers that may not know that they're the fathers. And so all of these groups have a stake in the decision. And so then we want to ask, what is the potential for conflict with or support of the stakeholders' values? What might be a conflict between a biological parent and a foster parent or an adoptive parent? Right, different invested interests. Adoptive parents, want a different view on the outcome. Rearing practices, that's true. Guilt on the part of the birth parent. I hadn't thought about that. So there are different, there are conflicts, different perspectives. The parenting, the agency, the parent, have different values. So, and then what are the forces? These are good. What are the forces, influences, or characteristics of the situation that put pressure on me or the organization to act in one particular way or the other? So what kind of pressures and influences are the parents looking at? What pressures or influences is the organization looking at? Yeah, belief in, who into trouble with the ethics committee and lose your license. Well, that's hopefully why we're here. Yeah, political and community forces. There's definitely something you need to keep in mind, and that is the political will of the community. What's going on with the politics? Oh, good. Pressure to find a quick permanent placement. So all of these high caseloads, oh my goodness, bless your hearts, high caseloads and government rules. So all of these things put pressure and try to influence you in whatever way you're going to act. So that's what we do when we clarify the issues. Get the facts. And so basically, we have to have the facts. Do regulations, policies, or standards of professional conduct apply to this decision? And basically, if you're looking at a child that you think has been abused, and you have a policy, a law that applies there, you have to report. What's been the past practice relative to this area of decision making, and how is it perceived by those affected? Is another question that you need to answer. Are there key facts I do not know? And if so, how can I find them out? I think this is huge. When you're making a decision, there's often, very, very often, there's just missing information, and you don't know where to get the information and how to find it out. So that's important. So getting the facts is really key to making your decision. And then you want to develop options. What are the possible courses of action? And at this point, what you want to do is put everything on the table, even though it may sound crazy or it won't work or you can't do it or you don't have the resources. Still, you want to consider that, because it might indicate or it might lead you to another idea or another choice. And then what are the likely choices preferred by those involved or are affected by this decision? So in your case, you're going to look at, what does the biological parent want? What does a foster parent need? What does the agency need? What does the state say that you have to do? And then what would I do if I were the only person affected by this decision? So, what is your real preference of what should happen if you're affected by this decision? So this is, like I said, this is where you just put everything on the table. Everything is possible in this case. And then you're going to assess the options. So the question here is, what are the likely consequences, both benefits and harm, to all those who will be affected by each option? So what might happen? What's the preferences by all those who are affected? Whether or not, a child may be taken away, removed, or a child may be given back to a biological parent. Those kinds of things that you have to decide on. Is there any option prohibited because of potential for violation of civil, contractual, or other rights of anyone affected? If so, then that one goes off the table. You pull that off even though that's been on the table in the previous step. Does each option treat all that are affected equally and proportionally? And you know what? It may not be possible to do that. You may not be able to treat everybody equally or proportionally. Would those affected be likely to perceive each solution as fair? That's kind of a losing proposition, because in many cases they won't be perceiving it as fair. And then to what extent is each option compatible with organizational values? And in your case, it may be not necessarily organizational values. It may be state law. What is the option that's compatible with state law that you have to do? Any questions or comments about this one on assessing the options? Okay. Our next step then is to make the decision and test it. So which option best balances the cost and benefits of those affected and the standards of fairness? Then review the options again. Is there another option that would achieve the same result at less cost to those affected? And this is a key question. How would I feel? Would I feel comfortable explaining my decision to my boss, to senior managers, to my family, or to a reporter? Why or why not? And boy, I don't know about talking to a reporter, but that would that would scare me off, because you always feel like if you're talking to a reporter, they're trying to catch you in something that's you've done wrong. So how would I feel explaining my decision to all of these options, all these people? So you make the decision and test it out. And then you must develop a plan for implementing your decision. So what steps will be most likely to achieve the desired result? What resources do I need to accomplish it, and how can I get them? And how can the plan go wrong? What could possibly, what can I do to prevent this? So looking back and just trying to see how to best implement the decision for success and for the outcomes that you're looking for. And then you want to implement the plan, and then you have to evaluate the plan. So I see somebody's typing, but I don't see anything coming up. Now let's look at a situation here. Here's an example. Oh, the decision, is this a decision-making model used in the courts? I'm not aware that it is the one that's used in CASA.
Yeah, I'll chime in, Julia. Not that I'm aware of, Adrienne. This is sort of a personal, professional, individual guiding process for your decision-making model for following any sort of code of ethics. And I don't know that systems and agencies such as CASA, foster care, CPS they have their own sort of internal policies, and I'm not sure that they have decision-making processes. But it sounds like to me, Adrienne, you think maybe they should, and I would agree. So.
Okay. So Adrienne thinks that there needs to be a decision-making model in this process. Well, it certainly is very thorough and helps you go through the steps. And, we have a tendency just to make a decision without considering all of these steps. And so when I teach the class, I teach the 6-hour ethics course, and we have certain ethical dilemmas and examples. The tendency is to skip through the steps and to make a decision. So I really force my groups to utilize the process, and they get tired of me saying use the model, but continue to use the model will help you make the right decision. So here's an example. Grace Land is an experienced CPS worker, and she has an investigation. She's concluded an investigation of suspected abuse of a 3-year-old child with a spiral fracture to the right arm, which has been reported by the treating emergency room physician after the mother sought treatment for her daughter. The mother said she thought the injury was most likely occurred when she was holding the child's hand as they were about to step off the curb to walk across the street, when the child had suddenly pulled away from the mother to dart into the street. Just as the car was coming, the mother pulled the child back towards her. The child twisted her body away from the mother in a further attempt to cross the street. Grace had always been taught that a spiral fracture was caused by abuse, but in this case, she believed the mother was telling the truth and did not intend to harm the child. So there are no other risk factors noted on the risk assessment. Grace's supervisor, Elvis Coverbutt, instructed Grace to indicate that in the report and let the mother appeal the decision if she wants to. So Grace is conflicted about this, right? So I don't know if on the screen, the next slide is your decision-making model. Mary already made her decision. So let's go through the model and the process. I don't know if we can just clarify the issues. Give me some information about what are the issues in Mary's dilemma. If we're clarifying the issues. Good. Okay. Oh, that's good, Julie. So the issues are, what is the mother's intention? The issues are, what is Grace's understanding of what constitute abuse? We don't, and the information we need, and that's, we're a step ahead here, is was the child interviewed? That's a good point. And what information did the child provide? The issues are the mother's word against what Grace has been taught. Her relationship with the family could cause bias. Mother's reporting of what happened versus what is supposed to. What did the medical personnel determine? And interviewing any other people that saw what happened. So when we're clarifying the issues are that, number one, the child has been injured and the physician said it was a spiral fracture. The issues are, the mother says it was an accident happening when the child was crossing the street. The issues are, Grace's supervisor had told her to report the incident. So then, let me go back here. What information is needed? Well, we need to know what was the mother's intention. We need to know, I'm looking at what you wrote. Was the child interviewed? We don't know that. And the other one that's good is was anybody else a witness? Did anybody see what happened when she was pulling the child back out of the street? So those are several issues that need to be clarified. Basically, the issue for Grace is, does she report or does she not report? So let's get the facts. So all we know, okay, let's see. Look to see where the video of the street. Oh, there might be.
Well, I think what we were talking about in this case study is initiating a case, right? So the CPS Graceland was investigating the case, and so rather than close this investigation, to actually open a case. And so we're using the term report, but I think what that really means for this specific case study is to whether to open a case or not. Is that right, Julie? Yeah, I'll come on and close this out. Julie, if you want to go ahead and mute yourself just to make sure we don't get any feedback. We'll open it up for Q&A here, and then if you have any questions for Julie, she can unmute and respond to that. And I just want to say that this decision-making model is very thorough. And so I learned it from Julie probably about a decade ago when I attended one of her trainings in Austin. And you can use it in any situation. So you can use it at work, you can use it at home. If you have teenagers at home, it might be helpful. Like Julie mentioned, a colleague who used it before an interview, absolutely, because it helps you think through the information that you need and helps you to think through who all is going to be impacted by your decision when you take action. And many of us don't really do that on a day-to-day basis. We have to make decisions and we have to make them quickly. And that's why we rely on our good judgment, and we rely on our professional development, and we rely on our training and our experience and our education. And at the same time, when we have true ethical dilemmas on our hands, where we're conflicted between perhaps policy, agency, our own personal morality, values, our lens through which we see the world, and then any personal licenses that we hold, this model, which you have Julie provided a wonderful ethical workbook for you. You all have that. It was emailed to you yesterday. And this is on page 8 through 10 through that workbook. And so you can literally print it out or type in your answers as you work through this model for any given situation. And it will really help you think thoroughly around all of the possibilities for the outcome. And I also just want to say, Julie, I love how you say, how would you feel saying this, sharing your decision with a reporter? My old boss, Jim Lindsay at Nexus Recovery Center, used to say, when you make your decision, would you be comfortable saying it in front of a judge? And I thought that was a good way to think about it when you're thinking about impacting other people and on this level and how it's going to impact their lives because of your professional role. We need to stop and think through all of those options. And it is a wonderful tool. And I want to say thank you so much for Julie for providing that. And also mentioning that, you make your teams in your trainings actually go through it. Because I remember doing that when I was in training with you. And that was the value of going through the model to actually stop and think about all of those. Do we have any other questions for Julie while we've got her on? We've got about 5 minutes left. Very thought-provoking, absolutely. It gives you a guide to work through to stay on track. I don't see anyone else typing. So I will assume that you all are good, are happy, hopefully, don't have any other questions. Certainly if you do, you can send us an email and we can put you in touch. I will be coming out with a follow-up email with this for your information and for your survey link. Here is, I'm going to go ahead and type in the survey link if you'd like to copy it directly from the chat box, but then I will also send it out in the follow-up email. Thank you so much, Julie. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your expertise. This has been wonderful information, and the workbook is an excellent tool for us. And all of you, just as a reminder, once you complete your online survey, then you have access to your CEU certificate for today's session. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and log off. I will stay on for a few minutes if I see any other comments come through. And thanks again, Julie.
Thank you.